It bore the date 1968, and the words South Africa inscribed proudly along its edge. It was a 1-cent coin, worn but not forgotten, a piece of metal carrying a story larger than its size. This coin had once passed through many hands, some gentle, some rough. It had jiggled in schoolchildren's pockets as they ran to the corner shop for sweets. It had been flipped by a young man deciding whether to take a job in Johannesburg or stay home in the countryside. It had even been dropped and picked up by a stranger, who pocketed it without a second thought, unaware of its silent journey. The front of the coin, or the obverse, featured a finely detailed portrait of Jan van Riebeeck, the Dutch colonial administrator and the founder of Cape Town. His face was stern, his eyes set forward, an image of a man who had once sailed the seas in search of trade and territory. Around him were the words, SUID Africa and South Africa, a dual-language reminder of the country's linguistic and cultural crossroads. On the back, the reverse, was a delicate image of two small sparrows, perched side by side on a twig. It was a humble, almost poetic design. The sparrows did not shout power or pride, but something gentler, perhaps the quiet resilience of a nation still finding its way through turbulent decades. Below them was the simple 1C marking its value, a reminder that even the smallest denominations had their place in the economy and in everyday life. The year 1968 was not just another calendar mark. South Africa, at the time, was deep in the grip of apartheid. Racial segregation and inequality were woven into the fabric of daily life. The coin, like so many others in circulation, was used by people living in vastly different worlds, some with privilege, others with none. And yet, it passed equally between them, indifferent to color, class, or language. In a way, it was a quiet observer, present in shops, train stations, and schools. As history unfolded around it, over time, newer coins replaced the 1968 1-cent piece. Inflation and economic changes made it nearly obsolete. Many were melted down or forgotten, lost in drawers or buried in the soil. But for collectors, historians, or even curious children stumbling upon it in their grandparents' homes, the coin still holds value, not just in metal, but in memory. As the decades passed, the world around the coin changed. South Africa transformed in ways that would have once seemed impossible. The iron grip of apartheid began to crack, and by the early 1990s, it fell away completely. In 1994, Nelson Mandela was elected the first black president of a democratic South Africa. The country was reborn, its people stepping into a future they had long dreamed of. But the coin, that small 1968 1-cent piece, remained a silent reminder of everything that came before. For those who came across it in later years, it often sparked questions. What was life like when this coin was new? Who used it? Whose fingers had held it? Whose hands had passed it on in exchange for bread, stamps, or a ride on a city bus? Each scratch on its surface, each darkened edge, seemed to speak of human contact, fleeting but real. Some collectors, drawn to history more than value, began to seek it out. Not because it was rare, millions had been minted, but because it represented something grounded and personal. It was not a coin of kings or emperors. It was a coin of everyday people, of ordinary lives lived through extraordinary times. The coin's copper color, once bright and reflective, had deepened to a dull brown with age. Time had worn away its shine, but not its meaning. In fact, the wear only added to its character. Just like the people of South Africa, the coin had endured. Sometimes, a grandparent would pull it out of an old jar and hand it to a curious grandchild. This, they'd say, was what we used when I was your age. And a new story would begin, a personal one, filled with memories of life under strict rules, of long walks to school, of a world without mobile phones or credit cards, where a single cent could still buy a sweet or make a difference in someone's day. Placed side by side with modern coins, the 1968 1 cent seems almost impossibly small. Its value today is little more than symbolic. It cannot buy anything in a store. But in the quiet spaces where history and memory meet, it holds weight far beyond its face value. It is a coin that came from a time of separation, yet now lives in a world that strives, however imperfectly, for unity. It was born in a divided nation, yet remains as part of the whole story, not just a chapter to forget, but one to learn from. In the quiet of a late afternoon, sunlight catches the edge of the old coin resting on a windowsill. It is still, silent, unassuming, but within it lies the echo of decades. The year 1968 is more than a number stamped into metal. It marks a moment in time, fixed forever in the heart of a coin that was never meant to be remembered, but somehow was. For some, the 1968 1 cent coin becomes an heirloom, not for its material worth, but for its symbolism. It becomes a way to connect with ancestors, grandparents who stood in long queues at bus stations, parents who worked hard for every cent they earned, children who learned early how to stretch a coin's value. It's a thread through generations, tying together people who lived under very different skies, but who shared a common ground. In museums and private collections, the coin sits quietly behind glass. It is catalogued, numbered, and studied. Experts note the design, the detail in the sparrows, the precision of the text, the pattern of age. They talk about the alloy, the minting process, the historical context. But outside those rooms, in the hands of the ordinary collector or the curious child, the coin speaks in a different way. It does not need to be explained. It only needs to be held. Perhaps the most powerful thing about the 1968 1 cent coin is not that it witnessed history, but that it survived it. It passed through pockets during times of fear and hope, protest and silence, division and unity. It endured through the shift of power, the rewriting of laws, the reshaping of national identity. And now, long after it lost its use in daily trade, it has found a second life, not as currency, but as testimony. Today, in a world increasingly digital and fast-moving, where coins themselves are fading from use, the 1968 1 cent is a relic from a different era. It invites reflection. It reminds us that history is not just found in textbooks or statues, but in the smallest of objects, things once held and forgotten, now rediscovered with wonder. Its face may be worn. Its edges may be soft. But its story remains intact, somewhere, in a small box beneath a bed or at the bottom of an old suitcase. Another 1968 1 cent coin lies waiting. Forgotten for years, maybe even decades, it rests among birthday cards, black and white photographs, dried flowers, and faded newspaper clippings. It doesn't shine like it once did. Time has dulled its color, but not its presence. The next person to find it, perhaps a teenager digging through family relics or a collector scanning flea market tables, won't just be picking up a coin. They'll be holding a portal. A silent witness to a South Africa that no longer exists, and yet lives on in memory and in stories still told around kitchen tables, in whispered recollections, in songs and silence. If they pause long enough to look at it, not just glance, but really see it, they might notice the way the sparrows are perched so close together. A small detail. Innocent, even delicate. Two birds sitting side by side, sharing a branch. In a time when the country they represented was so deeply divided, the image feels almost like a quiet rebellion, or maybe a quiet hope. Perhaps the artist who engraved the coin saw more than metal. Perhaps they wanted to leave behind something gentle, something that would last longer than fear or policy. The coin, in its own way, outlived the world it was made for. The laws, the systems, the leaders, all changed. But the coin remained. A constant. A piece of copper pressed with the hands of workers in a mint, then set loose into a country at war with itself, and now, Years later, it is no longer defined by the economy it once served. It is shaped instead by the questions it raises and the memories it stirs. What did this cent buy? Who carried it in their pocket? Did it lie under a pillow at night, saved for something special? Did it pass hands at a market stall, traded for fruit or bread? Or was it dropped on a pavement and forgotten, only to be found by a child with wide eyes and a curious mind? Each possibility adds to its quiet dignity. It has become, in essence, a storyteller. Not through words, but through presence. It speaks of what was lost, what was endured, and what still remains. Some will overlook it, dismissing it as junk, too small, too common, too old. But others will understand. They will recognize that history does not always come in loud moments or famous names. Sometimes, it comes in the shape of a coin barely larger than a fingernail, with 2 sparrows and a year etched forever into its surface. In the passage of time, the 1968 1-cent coin continues to carry the echoes of its origin, not through noise, but through its stillness. It does not clamor for attention the way rare or precious coins might. It sits quietly in drawers, tucked away in old tobacco tins, wedged between pages of forgotten books, almost as if it knows that its power lies not in being seen, but in being found. Some of the coins have traveled far from where they were minted. A few crossed oceans in the pockets of South Africans who left their homeland during times of uncertainty, some seeking safety, others opportunity. They carried little with them, perhaps a photograph, a Bible, a handful of keepsakes. Among those keepsakes, a small copper coin sometimes found its place, not for its value, but because it felt like home. Even in foreign lands, it served as a reminder of dusty roads, the smell of maize porridge in the air, the rhythm of a language not spoken aloud in years. For others, the coin never left. It remained in South Africa, rooted in its soil, just like the generations who lived and died in its shadow. Some were born long after 1968, but inherited the past in subtle ways. They may not remember the coin's everyday use, but they grew up hearing stories, some painful, others proud, of what life was like back then. And when they come across the coin, they feel a connection that goes beyond reason. A link to ancestors whose names they may not know, but whose lives made their own possible. Teachers have used the coin in classrooms, placing it before students as a simple object to study. But before long, the lesson becomes more than history. The students hold the coin, feel its weight, and realize that they are not so far removed from the past. That just 2 or 3 generations ago, this small piece of metal was part of someone's daily reality. It sparks questions that lead to stories, and stories that lead to understanding. In that way, the 1968 1-cent coin becomes more than a relic, it becomes a bridge. A bridge between old South Africa and new. Between pain and healing. Between forgetting and remembering. It is not a perfect object. Like the country it came from, it is marked, scarred, changed. The coin's surface might be chipped or tarnished, its lines softened by years of handling. But its imperfections are its beauty. They are proof of survival, of time past, of truths weathered but not erased, and perhaps, when the coin is finally placed in a collection, or tucked into a frame and hung on a wall, it will continue to do what it has always done quietly, connect people to stories they didn't know they were a part of. Stories not written in books, but carried in the pockets of farmers, teachers, maids, miners, students, and children. The coin asks nothing of us. It only offers presence. A piece of the past that still waits patiently to be seen, held, remembered. And so the journey of the 1968 1-cent coin continues, not in haste, but with quiet purpose, as though it knows there is still more for it to do. It may never sit behind glass in a grand exhibition, nor be listed in high-priced auctions. But that was never its role. Its worth was never in rarity. Its purpose was always in connection. In rural villages, where gravel roads wind between homesteads and the wind carries the scent of dry grass and wood smoke, the coin has been found buried beneath years of dust. Sometimes it emerges in the hands of a child playing in the earth, who runs to show it to an elder. The old man or woman, upon seeing it, might pause, go quiet for a moment, not because of the coin itself, but because of the flood of memories it carries. The simple glance of that copper face brings back images of old shops with wooden counters, of barefoot mornings, of long walks to school, and of news whispered over radios while families listened in silence. In cities, the coin hides in second-hand stores, antique markets, and the back corners of coin albums. There, it waits not for admiration, but for someone who understands. A curious eye, a thoughtful hand, someone who doesn't see just the faded metal, but sees what lies beneath. A story too layered for textbooks, too personal for news archives. The story of a nation's ordinary heartbeat, pulsing beneath decades of upheaval and hope. Some poets and writers have held this coin in their hands and drawn from it inspiration. Not because of its beauty, but because of its truth. It tells them that time can be captured, not in grandeur, but in the everyday, the things we touch without thinking, the things we spend without pause, the things we forget and then find again. It's a reminder that history is not only the domain of leaders and events. It lives in pocket change, in postmarks, in broken combs and handwritten notes. And in coins like this one. In homes across South Africa, and in far-off corners of the world where memories of the country are carried in accents and recipes and songs, this coin sits in drawers, on bookshelves, or inside jewelry boxes. Sometimes it's sewn into fabric, placed beneath floorboards, or kept with old army badges and wedding rings. It may not be spoken of often. But when it is spoken of with quiet reverence, not because of what it bought, but because of what it witnessed. It was there during long, hard days when 1 cent made a difference. It was there in the hands of people who worked, who struggled, who waited for change. It was there when parents gave it to children as a treat. It was there when strangers exchanged it with no words. It has known silent hunger and quiet joy. It has lived in the corners of lives that mattered, even if history books never recorded their names, and that is why the 1968 1-cent coin still matters. It reminds us that even in the smallest things, there are great stories. That history is not only what happens in grand halls and behind podiums. It's also what happens in markets, in homes, in whispers. It lives in the things we carry and the things we leave behind. The coin, now still an unspending, does not mourn the fact that it is no longer used. It has fulfilled its purpose and now serves a greater one. It helps us remember. Helps us ask questions. Helps us see how far we've come, and how far we still have to go. Perhaps one day, far in the future, someone will come across the 1968 1-cent coin in a place where no one expected it to be, tucked into the seam of an old wallet, lodged beneath a floorboard, or preserved inside a jar of curiosities in a museum no one visits often. They'll hold it in their hand and turn it over, the metal cool and worn smooth with time. The birds, the date, the face of Jan van Riebeek, familiar to some, mysterious to others, they might not immediately understand what they are holding. To them, it could look like just another coin from a distant past. But if they pause long enough, if they sit with it for a while and ask the right questions, they might begin to sense it. Not see it, not at first, but feel it, the weight of lives lived around it. They might imagine the hands that once held it. A domestic worker handing over change at the shop, her apron dusted with flour. A boy on his way to school, holding the coin tightly as he plans to buy a single sweet after class. A man on a dusty roadside, flipping it between his fingers while waiting for a bus that never comes. They might even imagine the last hand that let it go, a tired hand, an aging hand, letting the coin slip into the back of a drawer, not knowing it would one day become something more.